Afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today. To introduce myself, my name is Kate, and I am the Education Program Manager here at Sierra Club BC. We are so happy to have everyone join us. So, if you could please drop a little message in the chat from where you're tuning in from. I'm personally tuning in from Vancouver, BC, also known as the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And if you're tuning in from a school, please let us know what school you're tuning in from, and I hopefully can give you a shout out before we start. I will be monitoring the chat today. Ooh.
Oh, there. See, you get some from Washington as well. Yeah. Oh my God.
Oh,
Oh,
wow. All over the States.
goodness. This is
Oh,
great.
my goodness.
Ooh, PI.
Oakland,
Sure.
California. That's where I grew up.
Switzerland.
Oh, Sonoran Desert. Oh my God. This is wow. Nice. Look at
Scotland. Wow.
this. All right. It's moving so fast. I can barely.
I know. I'm trying to like keep up with my eyes, trying to see where everyone's coming from.
Ontario.
I feel like I have a map in my head whenever a new place pops up.
Mhm. Mhm. This is wonderful. Yeah, well, yeah, and thank you for everybody joining in from like across the big pond as well. It's a way later there. So,
Mhm.
yeah. Playing it nice. Everywhere.
All right, well, I am so excited to kick off this Learn to Draw all about carnivorous plants. As I said earlier, I will be monitoring the chat to answer any questions that you have, as well as the Q&A, so that I can help bring those back to our speakers. Today we have two guests. I am delighted to introduce Dr. John Adicott, who was an ecologist at the University of Alberta and Calgary for 33 years. His long-term focus has been on mutualism, especially with respect to plants and insects. Alongside Dr. Adicott, we also have our drawing scientists, Dr. Julius Chitney. Julius is a scientific illustrator and natural history fine artist. As always, we are delighted to have them here with us today to help us understand carnivorous plants a little bit better. And without further ado, I will hand it over to them to talk about the beings that we will be drawing today.
Well, thank you so much, Kate, for that great introduction. It's such a pleasure to be here again. And John, thank you so much for joining us. I'm here from Edmonton, right on the borders of the lands of the Muskegosic. And I love to see the forests next to me here, so this is really wonderful, and I long for the coast. But and John, thank you so much again for joining us here.
My pleasure. Good to see you again.
Indeed. Uh, I always remember, so John and I, like, he was my master's supervisor. And one of the things that the very first time we actually met and was by phone, I was in the physics program at the U of A at the very beginning. For a year and a half, I started with physics before going into biology. And I was starting to get interested in biology. And so I called the biology department and spoke to the student advisor. And it happened to be John Adicott. And so I was saying, well, I was thinking I might be interested in switching to biology. I'm not so sure. And I still remember, yeah, so he basically, yes, he encouraged me. And I still remember his words in response to that. He says, come on over. And so I did. And that was the rest of my life so far. So yeah, made that big choice, and it was fun. And then of course we studied all sorts of fun things together. I was part of the yucca crew. John did some wonderful research on yucca plants in the Southwest and the mutualism they have with yucca moths. And those were some of my very first research experiences, and I loved it. And then we went and I did studied facilitation and interesting interactions of different plants and animals in the arid or semi-arid regions in Jasper's dunes and so on, and just went from there. So, John, yeah, can you tell us a few words about yourself?
Well, I'll go back one thing. I don't remember that first interaction, but I think what people should realize about you is something I learned very quickly, is that you have an immense curiosity and you have an ability to ask questions. And asking questions is really probably the most critical side of science. And you've turned it to both science and to illustration because of that curiosity. So, yeah, it's a really great trait that you have.
Thank you, thank you. I sat in the front row all the time in your ecology class, and I think that's how uh,
Unfortunately.
I got that invite to be a lab assistant or sorry, a field assistant, and that's where the adventure all began. And that was fun days for sure. Um,
The reason I got into this discussion today is that my very first work was on carnivorous plants, the pitcher plants. I wasn't studying their carnivory, I was actually studying some organisms that live inside the pitcher plants and reproduce inside the pitcher plants. But it was an amazing experience. Got to know the pitcher plants, which occur all the way from eastern Canada down into the northeastern United States and all the way across into bits and pieces of British Columbia. And they're very interesting beasts, but perhaps not quite so interesting as the sundews and other plants that you're going to look at today, Julius.
so I mean, yeah, I would argue that they're right up there. And I mean, I guess a lot of people would say morphologically, at least the way they look, they're so much more extravagant. Do you have any photos to share with us of some of these? Because I think that this would be a really good jumping off point for people to show what one group of carnivorous plants actually looks like and how they function.
Yeah, where's
And
there we
to
go. Got it.
go ahead. Yep.
So am I sharing there?
Yep.
Okay. This is one example of pitcher plants. These are from the southeastern United States, and they're perhaps more typical of pitcher plants in general, in the sense that uh, you see here the tall leaf. These are basically tall leaves that fold in on each other, and they form uh, a, a vase or something like that. And a lot of the pitcher plants have these hoods over the top, and that prevents rainwater from getting in and the uh, preventing them from overflowing. Uh, and here's an example of what they look like in the as a group of them. So just sitting down there in the very sandy, very nutrient poor soils of South Carolina and North Carolina. Uh, and then in similar kinds of habitats, but usually wetter habitats, you get some things that Julius is going to talk about later on. These are the sundews that are basically sticky traps. Uh, and have the nice little sticky tentacles out here. And then if an insect happens to run into one of these sticky traps, it gets caught up and then eventually rolled up and gets digested. In the case of the pitcher plants, it's a much more passive phenomenon. It's not an active catching, and it's not really an active digestion either. Instead, what you have again is a leaf that's folded in on itself to form a cup, and the upper part of the cup here has hairs that are pointing down, so that if an insect happens to get in there, the tendency is to move down. And well, they want to go back up, but they can't. So they keep moving down, and eventually they drop into the center of the pitcher. And here's a nice little cutaway that shows the area up top here with all those downward pointing hairs. And then below it is really, really slippery, slick uh, tissue that they can't climb back up again. And then water collects. These are open pitchers, unlike the first ones I showed you. They're open pitchers, rainwater collects in them, the insects fall in, and eventually the insects die, and then the bacteria and a little bit of enzymes, but mostly bacteria will eventually cause the breakdown of the dead insects, and then the nitrogen and other nutrients are taken up by the plant. And that's what allows these plants to persist in what are otherwise very nutrient poor environments. So whether we're looking at the pitcher plants like the North American pitcher plants that grow in bogs, or the pitcher plants that are off on sandy soils, or the really wonderful pitcher plants in Southeast Asia, the Nepenthes, which are basically epiphytes, vines growing up in the trees. Uh, these are all places that are where it's really hard to get nutrients and otherwise persist. So what these insectivorous plants are doing is using other strategies for getting nutrients, i.e., capturing usually small organisms, anywhere from water fleas to salamander or newt larvae, and they get the nitrogen that way, and they're able to persist.
It's just it's so alien as plants on Earth go. It just seems so outlandish and amazing. I think it's really fascinating how you have a very trying environment, and these are these environments where evolution allows for or is the mechanism by which organisms solve problems, basically climb across these hurdles of survival. Not many nutrients in bog environments, for example, that are really acidic, partly because of the peat moss that grows that acidifies the surroundings and makes a lot of nutrients unavailable for plants. And because rainwater is the only source, and it's resulting from the way that a lot of these form in places where glaciers had carved out little scoops from the rock, and now there's no groundwater as much source or river water, but a lot of it comes only from rain. So it's really nutrient poor. This is just so neat to see the way in which some plants solve this problem by literally consuming, decomposing, or digesting insects. And as you said, even vertebrates like salamander and newt larvae. It's just wild.
I think
One
that's a very
question
good way of
before we
putting it, Julius, in the sense that a lot of the things we're looking at, a lot of things that you studied and I studied, you can look at them as problems that the environment or other organisms pose to a particular organism. Then the question is, what kinds of solutions are available, and which of those solutions have actually occurred and been successful and led to um, speciation, for example. And if you look, for example, at the list of all of the insectivorous plants, the sundews, which you'll be drawing later, uh, there's an incredible number of species of sundews. It's, I think 100, 150, something like that. Uh, it's a really effective way of getting you nutrients.
Yeah, it really is. Sorry, Kate, I think I heard you had a question there or a comment.
Great one to start our drawing off with, and I hope we can highlight it through some of the parts of the drawing. But there was a question on if insects are getting digested by bacteria in the leaf, how nutrients are getting absorbed by the plant. So hopefully we can see that in some of the
I'm
things that
gonna
we're drawing today.
sharing my screen here and see how this works. And um, as we do this, whoops, hang on. Is it working? It should be starting. Okay. Is that coming through okay for you guys?
Should be coming up in a sec.
Okay. It takes a moment for it to
There you
ready.
go.
Okay, excellent. Super. So this giant accumulation of stuff is part of what we're going to be, or is what we're going to be partly working on today, in the sense that um, I don't anticipate we're going to get through all of this, but I've selected a few key things to draw, and then you can, of course, use the drawing and other resources to draw your own as well. But these are some of the beautiful plants in BC specifically that essentially eat uh, meat. So it's just the weirdest thing. And sorry, and so Kate, what was the question again?
The question is if insects are getting digested by the bacteria in the leaf, how are nutrients getting absorbed by the plants?
Oh yeah, that's a neat thing there too, right? The way in which they're absorbed. Yes, you have the liberation of these nutrients, but then the plant also has to absorb them, and it's a little bit different in different plants. I know that at least in some of them, like Pinguicula here, for example, they have little pores in the leaf through which it enters. There are a variety of different, permeable uh, um, cell membranes and so on through which some of these materials enter. I'm not sure of all of the ways in which it happens, but maybe John, you could um,
I really can't add much more than that. In some cases, I've read that some of the cells that you would normally have showing up in the root systems, which allow for absorption of nutrients,
Mm-hmm.
they end up in the base of the pitcher plants, for example. But how, for example, the sundews
Yeah.
do it, or the Venus flytraps, that sort of thing, I really can't say.
Yeah, I know in some cases they've got various kinds of glands and various kinds of cells on the surface. Usually it's on the surface of the leaf in cases like sundews and pinguicula that actually do the absorbing. And a lot of these sticky, mucilaginous, snotty, basically little droplets on the surface of some of these, on the tips of some of these spines or these little leaf, they're called trichomes. That's where the actual entrapment occurs, and some digestive enzymes are secreted there as well. And these ones with the leaf sticky traps, and then the leaf surface itself is where the absorption takes place in those cases, at least. So I'm going to turn off the preview of this, but before we do that, I'll just point out that yeah, we've got a whole lot of interesting um, West Coast and Western and BC based carnivorous plants. And so we're going to focus mostly on those, but keep in mind that there are others as well. John pointed out that there's the pitcher plants, the Sarracenia. It's the genus of pitcher plants. I've drawn a little sketch of one on the far left here. It's not to scale. It should be way bigger because these plants are tiny. To give you an example, that plant on the far right, it's a Pinguicula vulgaris, which is it's called a butterwort. They're actually tiny. This here, I've got a living one. This is a giant. This is a big one. Okay. So they can be way smaller than this as well. It's been in this container of mine here for a year, just basically without additional water. It's just sealed off. It's recycling things over and over. They're tiny, tiny little plants. They can get way smaller. Some leaves can be like a couple of millimeters in size for some species, amazingly small. And so things like those pitcher plants are gigantic by comparison. Then there are also the Venus flytraps, which a lot of you are familiar with as well, which are very dramatic and they snap shut on insects that trigger these three little hairs on the inside of that very modified leaf. And to add to it, remember those pitchers that John showed a picture of, those unusual shapes, those are all modified leaves. That's a leaf that has evolved into this unusual shape that can hold liquid and secrete enzymes. The penthes, the ones that hang from vines, basically, which are also a form of pitcher but evolved completely independently, also secrete enzymes, and they are also a leaf tip that's modified. Really neat. Anyway, I'm gonna get onto the drawing because it's really easy to get like carried away with exciting chat about this, but I want us to also get going with this. So I'm going to start. So what I've done here is oriented the page differently from usual from these. Now it's portrait format, so they tall way up rather than sort of wide landscape, because I wanted to make this kind of a little bit more of a vertical layout because the plants are all kind of standing upward, and because we're looking at a couple of different environments. On the coast, if you find these carnivorous plants, they're typically in these bog environments. A bog is very specialized, kind of a wetland, where the only input of water basically is from the rain. Uh, the water table doesn't really, or it doesn't have groundwater coming in to exchange nutrients and elements. And it doesn't usually have a river running through it. It's like all gets from the air, and it has to be wet enough that it doesn't completely dry out as well. So it's a certain kind of a climate where they tend to form. Get a lot of moss starting in these kind of ponds that form initially in sort of these holes that glaciers often carve out. And then the moss just grows and grows and grows and grows until it fills up this pond and then starts to enlarge outward. And then you get this is a special kind of a moss called peat moss or sphagnum. As it grows, it acidifies. It causes the environment to become highly acidic, and that makes it hard for plants, even harder to get some nutrients. And so what we have is a very specialized environment, and it's very difficult to get nitrogen, especially for plants. And that's a lot of what they're after when they eat insects and other animals. They need nitrogen, and insects are full of nitrogen. We're all full of nitrogen. But it's not very much of it coming from the air, actually. The atmosphere is full of nitrogen, but it must be a nitrogen that's available for plants to absorb. So this is what's happening here. Now, the neat thing is here, well, okay. Oh, by the way, it's International Day for Women and Girls in Science today. So happy International Day for Women and Girls in Science too. This is actually a really good thing to keep in mind. We need more women scientists because a lot of the time the bias has been in the past largely, and still is in many cases, of a very male-dominated sciences. And we're starting to see a change in that. So let's get more girls involved. And I've had some absolutely wonderful mentors as well. And so I'm going to start up with the Pinguicula. So this little guy here is a representative of what we're starting with. So it's a really easy one to draw in many ways. It's a rosette of leaves first. And as we do this, I'm going to just kind of zoom in a little bit here and talk about what's happening. Sorry, I'll show you where it is on the page first. Okay, so it's going to be on the right side, a little bit down from the middle. We're going to draw this sort of a leaf that's kind of I'd say leaf shaped. But really it is kind of like it's a lemon shape kind of thing. It's a very, very characteristic leaf shape in many ways, sort of. But you'll notice that the edges, and this is nice that we have the model here, the edges kind of curl upward a bit. Now, the surface of these leaves, if you looked at it really closely with a magnifying glass, you would see a bunch of little teeny tiny little droplets. And they're at the ends of little stalks, very, very tiny. And so insects will come along and land on it or walk onto it, and it's sticky. And so they get trapped there. And the plant then releases enzymes. And then as it dissolves and digests the insects, the fluids that are now full of nitrogen and other nutrients get absorbed by the plant. And the leaf does, in fact, have little pores into which they pass. So the leaves of this guy are basically, it's a rosette of leaves. It's really easy, at least in this case, to imagine what this is like. And in environments like the north, where you have sort of these temperate environments, like in BC, a lot of these die back in the winter, and it forms what's called a hibernaculum. It's basically a kind of like a great big sort of bud that then becomes active again next year when it's warmer. And then, so this is interesting, and it's kind of a very simple plant in its appearance. And it is thought that this general form and that of looks like it's kind of freezing. Hopefully you guys can hear it okay. Getting a bit of strange freezing in the feed. But anyway, this form, this basic leaf with sticky droplets on it, may have been sort of the ancestral form of many carnivorous plants, and that those really extravagant forms, like the pitchers, may be evolved from something like this, or the Drosera, which we'll also draw then. The neat thing about these guys, about Pinguicula, is, and I'll zoom in here, so they produce flowers. These are flowering plants. They produce flowers, beautiful little flowers, on the end of a long stalk. Okay? So, yeah, here's my great artistic skills. I can't even draw a straight or slightly curved line. That's okay. See? The end of the stalk, you have these little flowers that have 5 petals, 1 pointing downward, 2 to the side, and then 2 at the top, sort of pointing upward and outward. And then a lot of these also have kind of like a funny little horn pointing backward. It's kind of the base of this sort of floret. Okay? Now, the interesting thing about these flowers in this case is that, well, how do plants reproduce, right? They need to have pollination. They need pollen to, often pollen from other plants to land in the flowers. And it's insects that often do the pollinating. But now we have kind of a problem here, right? Because insects are the pollinators. You need them to generate more new seeds, baby plants, but you also are eating insects, right? So now there's a bit of a kind of like a conflict there, right? So what do? You don't want to eat your pollinators, right? And so this is the neat thing about a lot of carnivorous plants is that they put their flowers at the end of these long stalks, far away from the leaves, the sticky leaves, where they would normally ensnare insects. And so the insects that normally pollinate them are not the ones that more likely fall victim to the plant's carnivory. And so it's kind of an interesting bit of a feature that has evolved to minimize eating one's own pollinators. And in fact, interestingly enough, Pinguicula can also digest some pollen. So there's pollen from other plants that lands on them. They can also digest some of that for food. So here's the neat thing. Pinguicula is one of those strange plants that is not only carnivorous, but also herbivorous. It also eats other plants in a sense. So the very, very strange environment. It's kind of an odd thing here in these bogs. The other thing is that I'm kind of organizing the drawing today into a almost like a cluster of plants, almost like a bouquet. So Valentine's Day is, only about what, 3 days away. We're looking at the most alien, most unusual, absurd kind of a bouquet you can imagine here, basically. So this is kind of also a little bit of fun that I'm having. And so we have, okay, so that's Pinguicula. So we have beautiful diversity of these carnivorous plants. They eat insects. Mostly these guys will eat tiny insects, right? Because the tiny droplets on the surface can't really deal with very large insects. Even more interesting, more interesting, smaller. We're not going to draw this next one, but I'll introduce it to you. So this is kind of cool. In 2021, a group from UBC discovered that this plant called the Western false asphodel, the Triantha occidentalis, is also carnivorous. It wasn't known before that to be carnivorous. In this case, it's just the stalk of the inflorescence where the flowers are that is sticky. There's little tiny droplets as well. And this one only basically can ensnare tiny insects like midges and gnats that get stuck on it. So I've kind of drawn this one here with little tiny insects stuck on the surface of that stalk, like here, for example. And so therefore it's relatively safe because most of the pollinators are probably going to be larger insects than that. And this plant, unlike most others, doesn't separate very much the place where it entraps insects from its flowers where it attracts pollinators. So that's kind of important that you look at it, have a different group of insects pollinating you than the ones you're eating. We're going to draw, and this is where I think it gets kind of fun. And these ones look so alien when you look at them close up. Drosera, the sundews. Okay, so that's the next one here. So that was just a quick introduction to the Western false asphodel, which is a newly discovered carnivorous plant, which is exciting for botanists when you discover something brand new that was not known to be a certain way. And so sundews are these ones that John had some wonderful photos of with the really sticky droplets on the leaves. They're kind of like the Pinguicula, but bigger drops, so they can ensnare bigger insects, and then they'll wrap around the insect. Really kind of neat because tomorrow is Darwin Day as well, right? So kind of celebrating the birth of Charles Darwin, and we're talking about evolution a lot here, the evolution of plants that have been able to digest and eat insects, basically. And Darwin loved sundews. There's a famous quote by him. He says, because he studied Drosera, these sundews, for a while as a wonderful example of evolution. His quote was, "I care more about Drosera," that's the genus, than the origin of all the species in the world. So he took a very special liking to sundews at one point in his life, at least. So I'm going to start drawing this sundew leaf. Now, BC has several species of sundews. And they vary a lot in the shape of the leaf. We're going to draw one leaf of these guys. And the one I'm selecting now is a neat one. It's Drosera anglica. It's a longer leafed one, and it's neat because of the way that it can wrap around prey, especially. Okay, so you're going to start here slightly to the lower left of these other ones, and we're just going to draw this long leaf stalk, or petiole as we call it. It's like the stalk of the leaf first. So you'll notice that today is drawing very, very simple shapes in many ways. It's the story behind that's going to be especially more interesting, but also the composition that you can do with the artwork. Plants make these beautiful biological communities. The communities themselves end up creating emergent form that isn't there in an individual plant. A forest has a particular look to it, right? It's like an object all in itself. The whole saying of, seeing the trees for the forest or vice versa, implies that we can see a larger structure than an individual plant. And that is so true in bogs as well. When you look at a bog, it's a gorgeous collection of different beings. So that's the stalk. Then the blade of the leaf, which is the big wide part, in this case, it's relatively long and narrow. I'd like you to draw it just very, very lightly because we're going to add other details to it. So you can even do like a little dotted line, and it goes up like this here, come up from the petiole or leaf stalk. It's flattened, but it's kind of thick. It's like it's kind of like a belt, but like a thick belt. The reason we're drawing it sort of lightly or dotted is because now we're going to add these funny little spikes that come out of it with the sticky drop of dew on the end. Not true dew. It's not actually just from the air. It's actually mucilage, kind of a sticky, snotty substance that the plant secretes. And so what you do, and this is very organic. Every one of these leaves is a little bit different. The pattern is what matters here, and where you put these little trichomes, as they're called, these little spikes with the dewdrop at the end, is up to you. But just keep in mind that there's sort of an arrangement. They kind of come out, and there's a row of them that's longer along the edge. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so we can see better here. Let's see what's going on. Along the edge of the leaf, there are these longer ones, kind of. It's a long spike and a little drop at the end. And if you really want to be an artist about this, remember that the droplet is translucent. It's kind of like it's a drop of, it looks like water, basically. And so what's neat is if you looked at it really closely with a magnifying glass, you would see an image. It's a lens. You could see the image of everything behind it, but upside down in it. And so, you can, if you wanted to draw like a little dark area which represents the ground sort of thing. And yeah, it's up to you, but keep in mind that that's what it would look like if you looked at it very close. It would form an image of whatever's behind it, but miniature and upside down, because that's how lenses work, these simple lenses. And so it just basically we'll be drawing a lot of these little spikes with dewdrops at the end. And so there's a line of them along the edge, and then there are slightly smaller ones coming out of the center of the leaf along the sort of the upper surface of the leaf is what we're going to call this, because that's what that is. The undersurface of the leaf is devoid of them. There are no droplets and these little spikes or trichomes coming off from the underside of the leaf. The underside is the part that we can't see in this image because it's on the other side of the leaf. I'm just having a little bit of trouble with the computer being really, I think it's the connection is doing kind of funny things. So I apologize if there's any breaks in the video or sound here, but it's kind of giving me a bit of a hard time. Regardless, this is what we do. So I always found it interesting to draw plants because plants take a lot of effort, but it's the kind of drawing that tends to be quite meditative to me. I do a lot of painting of plants in my work because a lot of what I do is reconstructing prehistoric ecosystems, and there are some really interesting and unusual plants there, and there were a lot of plants around. And so I do a lot of drawing of plants and painting of plants, also dead plant litter, and I absolutely love it. Not everybody's cup of tea for sure, but I do really love it. So I'm not going to assume that everybody does. So we're going to kind of do some of this here, and then we'll move along. But while I'm doing this, John, is there anything else interesting that you can add about these? Because this is a little bit of a process at this point here. Oh, and I think you're muted still. All right.
I guess, well, I saw one question pop up earlier on. Someone asked, what kind of impact would there be if we didn't have insectivorous plants? So imagine that you go out into a bog in British Columbia, or you're in Labrador, or you're in Southeast Asia with the Nepanthes. The question would be, what role are these plants, what larger role might these plants be playing in the ecosystem? Or perhaps another way to put it is, how would the ecosystem change in the absence of these plants? If I were to make a guess, I would say probably not very much. They are, we're not looking at very large plants. We're probably not looking at huge number of insects being caught. So my guess is that, as with most ecosystems, if you change one little part of it, the rest will adjust to it. There are exceptions to that, of course, when we start looking at keystone predators and things like that. When you take something out of the upper part of the food web, it can dramatically change what happens in the rest of the community. But I think at the level of these plants eating insects, the role is probably not very great. But there was also a very interesting comment that someone had earlier on and said, "Hey, if you want to get rid of fruit flies in your house, grow some sundews." And I thought that was great because we've had times when we've been trying to get rid of gnats or something like that, and I couldn't figure out how to do it. So we'll have to think about using sundews. But overall, I would guess that looking at or sort of choosing to pick up on the larger role of insectivorous plants, probably not very great because they don't make up a very large or a particularly effective component of uh, the mortality that's caused in insects. But that's a guess.
And I think it's interesting. I'm sorry, go on.
No, no,
I was going to say that tangential to that or directly related, um, if we removed these particular plants from the ecosystem, that makes sense. But what often ends up happening is it's the ecosystem itself that's threatened. And in this case, it's really pertinent because peat bogs are indeed very threatened ecosystem worldwide. They are mined for peat moss, which is used
yeah,
in cultivation of all kinds of things and other things. So it's actually we would lose the carnivorous plants, but it's because we're losing the entire ecosystem. And so there is a huge conservation um, uh, issue here.
yeah. And as, of course, as environments are changing, you may get into situations where a particular environment gets very, very dry. Uh, that's going to dramatically change what's going on in, let's say, in the peatlands, in the bogs, that sort of thing.
And of course, now we have increased fire frequency due to accelerating climate change as well. And one of the things we're starting to see is subterranean fires that some of these peat bogs become dried out enough that you have smoldering fires that last over winter. Last year or a couple of years ago was the first time I heard the term zombie fires, which
Yeah.
basically are fires that continue to burn or smolder under the surface all winter long and then start up new fires from underground the next year when it becomes fire season. Unbelievable that this is actually starting to happen more and more, but it is.
Hey,
Yeah.
Julius, this is just Aurora. Hi, everyone. I'm with Terra Club. We have a lot of folks asking if you can zoom out because they would like to see more of the drawing.
Okay,
Um,
good point. Yes. And
uh,
also we're going to see more of it. Yeah, go on. Sorry.
yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. So actually from here on, this was kind of a big highly intensive bit because it's a lot of detail. Plants are an interesting thing to draw in this sense because it takes a lot of effort to do them. But one of the reasons I wanted to select this particular species of sundew, which is Drosera anglica, is because of this weird leaf shape. And if you looked at this close up, I mean, if you looked at photographs of this, so close up photos, it really doesn't look like your average plant in many ways. You know, if anything, I'm somebody I really enjoy, um, it, coming up with or imagining what life might be like on other planets. And you know what? This is an example of something that would appear in a lot of science fiction stories, for example, something like this where you have this kind of a weird upstanding leaf with these balls at the end. It just looks so alien to me. And so Sundews, when you look at them at that scale, look very much unlike a lot of other life on Earth that fits the term plant. Now, what's neat about these is, as John was saying earlier, when an insect lands on or crawls onto the surface of this leaf and gets stuck on one of these little balls of mucilage or like snotty, sticky stuff at the end of these trichomes, they get stuck. But then what happens then is that that movement, that stimulation, causes a reaction, a sort of a chemical uh, kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of a snowball effect to take place at the base of other ones of these little spikes, and they bend toward the insect. And so a whole bunch of them suddenly converge on this poor insect that's trapped, and then they stick it even more because all of a sudden these other balls of sticky stuff get attached to the insect. So the insect now has several things attached to it. And in addition to that, the whole leaf also starts to bend around it, partly because it's being tugged by the sticky stuff, but also because I think it's called stigmataxis, where the leaf actually can bend in the direction of a stimulus. And so what you end up having happen is this. You have, and this is a very large fly, but also a very small leaf that has become unrolled like a fly sushi inside of one of these leaves of this species, or this is actually closer to what is called Drosera linearis, easy for me to say, Drosera linearis, which has a much longer, narrower leaf actually, and can actually do this really well. It can wrap a fly. And so yes, we have fly sushi. I've seen photographs of damsel flies with it wrapped right around their abdomen, and they can't take off. It's a big meal. And so this will last a while to digest. They have symbioses with special bacteria and fungi that also do part of the decomposition, as John was saying, with the pitcher plants as well. These plants actually secrete a lot more of their own enzymes that digest proteins and other components of the insect. Really, really neat stuff. Even the chitin. Yep.
Are there any insects that are detrimental to carnivorous plants? We've got a couple of people wondering about that.
Interesting question. Um, John, do you know of when
I
you
do not. Might have seen a reference to a couple of herbivorous fly larvae or something like that that might eat them, but I'll just have to go back to my experience with the pitcher plants in the northern bogs. Uh, didn't see very much. Actually, the only thing that I saw that might is it sort of a curiosity is that things known as crab spiders
Hmm.
uh, like to hang out around the tops of the pitcher plants, and as other insects were attracted to sometimes the pitcher plants and other insectivorous plants produce smells that will attract in pollinators or attract in prey. In some cases, the crab spiders would pick them off. Uh,
very
but one of the things that you should consider, and I think Julius mentioned it earlier with the asphodel, is that if you are producing flowers and you want to reproduce and have seeds and all of that, then it's probably not a good idea to put your traps in the same place that your flowers are located. So in the case of the pitcher plants, most of them, the flowering stalks are much, much higher than the location of these pitfall traps, the leaves of the pitchers. So it separates out the different components that are in the life history of the plants that are important. One being getting nitrogen, the other being getting pollinated.
Yeah, that's actually it's so interesting to see that happen. And of course, it makes you wonder how much they've become more effective at reproducing over evolutionary time, over millions of years as this evolved, basically. Where initially, of course, there probably wouldn't have been as much separation, right?
Perhaps another curiosity would be to go into a completely different set of organisms, the orchids in tropical environments, which produce scents that mimic the
Yeah.
uh, uh, chemicals that attract uh, bees to each other for mating. And so these bees come, they come and get, in a sense, enticed into, but not trapped into the flowers, thinking they're getting a mate. And instead, what they end up is with a bunch of pollen on their back, which they then go and take to the next one that fools them.
Yeah,
So lots of different ways of being attracted for lots of different reasons. But in the case of the insectivorous plants, you really want to separate out those two functions.
makes a lot of sense actually that way that you'd want to do that. In the meantime, I've also drawn a little bit of peat moss or sphagnum moss, which is the whole basis of these peat bogs. There's several species, but peat mosses are a particular group of mosses or bryophytes, as they're called, and they're the ones that form these bogs basically by causing this environment to become more and more acidic, and then therefore filtering the kinds of plants and animals that feed on them or interact with them that then grow in these environments. And so I've actually just added a bunch more afterwards here for us to see. But in addition, I've also highlighted another species of sundew or Drosera, which is this guy on the far left here with these weird rounded leaves. So this is Drosera rotundifolia, and there's a few species of sundews in BC. This is one of the other common, probably the more common one that you're going to see actually in bogs, and they're pancake shaped leaves. It's a little hard to see here, but they're flat pancake shaped. And then there's a bunch of these sticky ended trichomes, little spikes all over the upper surface of them. Again, they form basically kind of like my pinkvicula plant here, my butterwort. They'll form a rosette of these leaves from the center, and John's photo showed that nicely. And then up from there, you'll have, and I don't have it here, a picture of it, but again, like John was just saying, they have these inflorescences or groups of flowers at the end of these stalks that they raise way higher above these leaves that are close to the ground, so their pollinators don't get entrapped as easily on the leaves. But that's another type. So we've got a bunch of these growing on and within the peat moss in this peat bog. And I'd like to switch now to a different environment in the same general ecosystem, although there's also some variation here. We're going to plunge under the surface of the water. So this, you can see I add a little bit of lines here to show that this is the water table. And there's a lot of water in bogs. If you've ever been in a bog, usually, and there's some beautiful ones on the West Coast, usually there will be a boardwalk constructed because bogs are sensitive to any kind of physical damage. Very slow growing plants take a long time to recover from damage. So we don't want to trample them, right? If you have a bog, try not to walk over it. There are some beautiful parks to visit on the West Coast that have bog ecosystems, and you walk on the boardwalk and you can see below it. And if the other reason for the need for a boardwalk is they're really soggy environments. You would get soaked if you walked through a lot of them. And so you have standing water in some. Standing water is host to some really neat kinds of carnivorous plants. Now, this isn't the only place where some of these exist. The next one we're going to draw a leaf of actually is all over the place in North America, not just in bogs. Some of them grow in lakes and flowing water as well, but bogs are another place where they exist. And I've seen these for ages now. I had no idea until recently that they were carnivorous plants, and I'm sure you've seen lots of these as well. They are called the bladderworts in the genus Utricularia. And they're the neatest looking plants. If you look under the surface of many lakes, especially in calm water, you'll see these weird rope-like stems, rope-like bunches of leaves, basically, very, very intricate, many branched leaves. They're just the neatest thing. And if you look really closely, if you pick up, you can hold one of those ropes and just look at this long stem with these many little fluffy leaves on the edge. If you look at the leaf individual, you'll notice that not only is it like highly branched, or we'll draw one right now, but in between those branches, there are these funny little bulby things, these little bagpipe-like sacs. That's where the action takes place. So I'm going to shift down on our page here. We're going to look at our bladderwort. And so the leaf of these guys, as I said, was really branched. Now, several species, and in BC there are a few as well. Zooming in a little bit. There's the base, sort of the stalk of the plant, and then, okay, so I'm going to have to clarify something here. I keep saying leaf and stalk. Bladderworts are alien, even as carnivorous plants go. They don't have differentiated leaves or roots or stems. It's all this green tissue that's differentiated into sort of like leafy function and sort of stem function, but it's not distinct leaves in the same way that other plants' leaves are. It's like multiply branched tissues. It's the neatest thing. And yeah, they don't have roots often. The ones that live in the water, there's some that live on land or underground or sticking up out of the ground that do have some root-like function, but the ones in water often don't. So you start by drawing this kind of like a zigzag stalk of this. I'm going to call it sort of a leaf because it is the closest thing to a leaf. And then the lengths of the zigzag, the sections get shorter as you go to the end, basically a little bit, and narrower. It's the easiest way to draw this. And then from that, at each of the corners of this zigzag, you get another extension, and then that branches, and then that branches again, and sometimes again. It's a complex bit of branching that takes place. It's very narrow tissue, very filament-like, basically. It just branches over and over. And then you do that for, a bunch, each of these corners of that zigzag, basically. Okay? And okay, this is my computer's doing some funny thing. I think it's the connection. Sometimes it is a funny thing. It slows down the actual drawing program I'm using. So that's okay. But this is what we have here with the leaf. It's doing this multiple branch thing. And of course, the different species, the different kinds of bladderworts even in BC have very differently shaped, well, let's call them leaves, basically. Some of them have these very long, narrow filamentous branches on the structure, and other ones have a little bit more of a typical leaf-like shape in that they're flatter and wider, each of these sections, and so you get kind of like a very, very, very intricate like extension of a maple leaf kind of situation, but way more complex than that still. This one here is one that's called Utricularia vulgaris. It's the most common one that you're going to see in North America. Okay, so my machine is doing some really, really weird slowing. So I'm going to stop with drawing, but I'm going to actually put up the whole one here in full because it is, for some reason, there's a problem with the internet connection today. Okay, so we're just going to do this. I'll show you the whole thing at full. Okay, so that's the leaf that we're drawing. Now, this is the green part of it that functions for photosynthesis. And of course, it passes along the photosynthetic, the photosynthate, we call it this kind of the sugars that it produces, down into the rest of the plant's body. But let me just fix something here so that it doesn't get too messy because I had to adjust my approach because the internet connection was really messing with us here. That's not exactly right. What we have there, that's it. Good. Okay. In between these zigzag sections, we have this really interesting structure. And it's shaped, oh my goodness, what would you call this shape? It's kind of like a lemon section almost. It's a sac. And if I were to draw a little bit of a bigger version of it, it looks a bit like this. Okay, the little stalk at the end that attaches it to the rest of the stem of the plant. And then it's hollow inside. At the end of it, and especially at least in the aquatic ones that are fully submerged, it's got these little branching hairs. And what happens is botanists look at this and they a lot of them consider this to be the most extravagant, the most complicated form of a dynamic structure in plants. What ends up happening is that little water fleas, for example, or whatever other kinds of small aquatic insects will swim here toward the end. When they touch those little hairs, those branched hairs, that triggers a door on the very tip of this bladder to spring open. And because over time the plant has been pumping water out of the sac has been getting close, more and more closed, more tight. There's a negative pressure, a suction building up inside, but the door has kept it sealed. Now the insect has sprung it open. That door opens and the thing just fills with water in like hundredths of a second. And with the water, anything that's entrained in it. So the insect gets sucked in with the water into this sac, and then the door closes at the end. And so now you've got this little sack of water and an insect meal inside of it, and the plant starts to release digestive enzymes to digest it, which is now, of course, a captive water flea or whatever. Sometimes tadpoles or mosquito larvae are sucked in, sometimes only part of the way, but experiments have shown that the plant manages to, or the bladder manages to basically suck those in gradually fully. So they become fully encased within the bladder and get digested. And so this is an absolutely crazy, amazing kind of carnivore plant. It's very much in some ways like the Venus flytraps that spring shut suddenly on flies, but it's more complex than them because it includes the sac, the door that closes shut afterwards, and there's also some other component inside that are key to its function. But there's a whole series of these little bladders of different sizes along this, shall we say, leaf-like structure. And of course, the different sizes make sense too, because you get different size of prey that it can feed on. It's just the weirdest plant. It is so actively carnivorous. It doesn't get too much weirder than that. And if you put the whole thing together, so that was one little section or kind of like a leaf. Let me just bring us here back. My computer is really not liking something about the speed of the internet connection here. I have to look into that. If I were to put the whole thing together, this is what it would look like. Wow, it's a crazy amount of detail there, right? So obviously we're going to draw the whole thing in one shot here. This is something that you could do, but I wanted to give you the basis for drawing the individual components. And all that I've done here is basically multiplied out that leaf and attached it to this stalk. And so now you might recognize these from trips you've taken to wetlands where you look under the surface and there are these strange ropes of complicated branched green stuff. And that's Utricularia. And you might or might not have known they're carnivorous plants, but they're carnivorous plants and they actively hunt. Well, they're ambush predators. They actively sit and wait for something to come close enough, trigger the hairs, and suck them in. And so there we go. So we have our little wild alien looking Valentine's bouquet, basically. And again, there are things we can do to help these ecosystems of beautiful carnivorous plants and everything else that exists with them. For one thing, the biggest threat to them these days probably is climate change, in the sense that it's drying, it's heating up, the distribution of these ecosystems changes, and because they can only exist in certain climatic sort of limitations, as well as the shape of the rock under them that holds the entire community, it's going to limit the abundance of a lot of these. Some will spread further north, but then again, we have problems with the heating up of the Arctic as well. And so we're losing some of this. Also, they're mined actively for the peat moss, which is used as a growth medium. You can actually look for cultivated peat moss as well, and instead of the ones that are mined, if you're needing it for, say, cultivation or for house plants. My place is full of house plants. And and also when we're visiting these beautiful environments, we need to take care not to step on it because some of these plants take a long time to grow. So yeah, what else? Anything else you can add to that, John?
I think the only thing I would do in overview is to think of carnivorous plants on very much of a spectrum. So, for example, if you've ever traveled to maybe Florida or into the tropics, you've probably seen bromeliads, or you've certainly seen them in the stores. And bromeliads have basically the leaves come together into a tank, and when it rains, water gets in there, and then things will fall in. And the plants are capable of taking in nutrients that way. Some of the bromeliads have gotten to the point of actually producing some digestive enzymes. And then you get, pitcher plants that are basically going just a little bit further. They don't do much attraction, but if something falls in, they stay in and they can't get out. And then you work your way up to the Drosera, which are sticky traps. And then you go even further and you get into the Venus flytraps or the bladderworts that you've just illustrated, where the mechanism is very, very active. So what it illustrates is this really lovely spectrum of different ways in which plants have, rather than going strictly through the root system, have figured out different ways in which to get the nitrogen which they might be lacking in the environment. And I love looking at that spectrum. It's a lovely phenomenon.
Yeah, the diversity of life on Earth and how we have evolution generating this huge radiation of different life forms, but often some of those basal ancestral shapes have remained as well. And so we have this, you can actually put together in some cases, you can see the way in which things evolved just from the currently existing diversity of plants as well. You have representatives from several points along that process. It is beautiful to see this.
Yeah.
We'll wrap it up there. Big thank you for everyone who joined us today. We would love for you to share your drawings with us, so please send them our way. Our next Learn to Draw is on May 21st, and it's going to be all about humpback whales, and we're going to have some representatives from Oceanwise joining us. So I hope to see you all there, and I hope everyone has a wonderful Wednesday. Thank you, and goodbye.
Yeah, thank you everybody for joining us and for bearing with us with the long plant drawing. Painting's even more fun.